if we want to make quote unquote poor countries not so poor, then we need to think about what resource do they really have. They have human beings, and as long as the human beings use their time, their hands, their brains productively, then the economy is bound to pick up, and that is the best way to pick up.
Friends, welcome to another episode of Prosper, the podcast of the Sioka Center, the Entrepreneurship Center at the Bush School of Business. We're the place where innovation meets personal vocation. I'm your host, Andreas Widmer, joined as always by my colleague, Sioka Center Executive Director, Rebecca Teddy. And we didn't attend it, but providentially, this season has turned out to be a kind of exploration of enterprise solutions to poverty, didn't it, Rebecca?
That's right. And I am so delighted to have Iqbal Quadir with us today. This episode is, in a way, 3 years in the making because this is the first guest I ever wanted to have on the program. And it's taken us this long because he's so big and important that we couldn't have him until now. So it's so delightful to have our dear friend Iqbal Quadir here with us to tell the really edifying story, his own story, but also the story of Grameenphone.
But let me tell you, by way of intro, let me tell you a little bit about him. So I have to say, in full disclosure, Iqbal and I have been friends for 20 years almost, huh? So we know each other for a long time, but I always found that he's kind of a unicorn because he's a perfect cross, developing world, all the way to Wall Street, academic and entrepreneur, crosses many worlds and many topics. He was recently a research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He worked there with his focus was impact of technologies on politics of developing countries. Before that, he was with MIT. He founded the Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship. And of course, he's the founder of Grameenphone, a mobile phone company serving rural areas in his native Bangladesh and beyond.
The Grameenphone story is one that we have been dying to tell, as I said. But first, let's get started with just a warm-up question. Iqbal Quadir, welcome to Prosper. And we always start with the warm-up question of what's the best thing you're reading right now?
I'm always interested in history. I recently discovered this book by Peter Frankopan called The Silk Roads, and I encourage you all to read the book. It's about a new way of looking at history, and somewhat he's British, but he focuses on how, let's say, about 1,000 years ago, Baghdad actually was the center of the world, and how the world actually has shifted, uh, quote unquote, to the west. And it's very interesting, actually. I recommend it to everybody. Peter Frankopan. Yeah, yeah.
And it's shifting again, isn't it? That's
Shifting again,
the world
perhaps. Yeah.
continues to
Yeah.
shift. I
It
find
is
that,
the center of gravity shifts all the time. Yeah.
yeah, and we should not look at this as a good, as a bad or whatever. It's like the moon, the phases of moon. It just shifts, right? You just stay with it. What I found, and if you indulge us, tell us a bit about that experience of you coming from Bangladesh and being in the US, and you sit in one of the high rises in Manhattan, right? And you think back of this was one of your epiphanies, one of your turning points in your thought, wasn't it?
Yes. Thank you. And but maybe I should go back a little bit before that. Because your mind needs to be prepared to catch something that happens in front of you to some extent. It so happens that, let's say, previous 10, 20, 15 years, this was 93. So actually, almost, I would say, 15, 16 years. I have studied for nearly 10 years in American schools and universities. So I happen to have studied whatever was happening with digital technologies and computers and things like that, but also the economic history of countries, etc., and how economics and digital sciences were my areas of focus. So, in any event, in the high rise in Manhattan, I was also, this is the beginning of the internet era, 93, I believe. At least maybe a few other people have gotten the internet before, but we didn't. Our our offices were connected by even a local area network whereby we could update each other whatever part one person is working on and send the file to another person, and as opposed to exchanging floppy disks. From before that, I mean, most young people wouldn't know floppy disks. This was the kind of the pen drive of the time, where you could move one file and give it to somebody else physically. And but because of this technology, we didn't quite have to hand deliver the material you worked on to another person. It's more of a, you could just ship it by wire, like we send an email this today. But and emails were not that common at the time. I mean, I think some particular setups had a email system, but not uh, like we had in this office, but not now everybody uses email. That was not the case at the time. So one day this network broke down, and I was waiting for someone to come and fix it. And as I was waiting, I remembered the day in 1971 in Bangladesh where when the country was going through a war. And because of the war, I grew up in an urban area, but because the urban areas were more accessible to the Pakistani military, so we could go to a remote area where it is not so accessible, so safer actually. And so it turns out that my grandparents' place was safer. So we went to quote unquote a remote rural area, and we lived there during this war year. And at that time, we didn't know it was going to be end within a year, but it did. And so one time, my mother had asked me to get some, medicine for a younger sibling, and I walked like 10 kilometers um, in the morning to get to that place. When I was there, the medicine man wasn't there. He has gone to go get his supplies from perhaps from an urban center. And then I pretty much walked all afternoon back. So this was a wasted day. I remember very well. I was close to, I think, 15, or no, actually 13. And I then when I was sitting in New York, I remembered the day, and I, realized that the having connections are very useful. Here I was spending time idly, not having a connection from one computer to another. And 21, I guess 22 years earlier, another lack of connections led me to waste a day. And so I put the two and two together and say connectivity is productivity. And that's what I made it a kind of a slogan of for myself, because I was having hard time convincing people that people, even what was then pretty poor country, needed telephones, and that people did not necessarily believe in. That's not the highest priority. What am I talking about? And so I made the point that connectivity makes people more productive. So this was the main purpose of that slogan.
And that caused you to eventually bring the idea, and it wasn't just connectivity in terms of a phone, it was the connectivity in terms of a cell phone right away, right? Where you thought this is a productivity tool.
If you then go into overall, of course, mobile phones have existed since 73. However, the first time somebody made it into a digital device was 91. 1 or 2 years earlier. And then, actually, when that happened, I naturally became kind of open to thinking about it a little bit, because anything that is going into the digital arena becomes subject to this Moore's law, whereby the price of that keeps falling. And so then my point was, even if it is very expensive now, by the time over time it will become more and more affordable to people. And so there are actually two things going on. One is that people would wonder, why are we going to need mobile phones for a developing poor country? The number one reason is that it will make people more productive. That means they can get more done within their time. If they get more done, then their economy is getting boosting, or their own personal income is also going up. Okay. Now, the point is that if their income is going up, okay, then they should be able to pay for a service. So that's one part of the point, namely, from the demand side, they can actually demand and paying for it. There is no reason for it to be charitable. Okay. And now, on the other hand, if the price of the device is going down, then it will become more and more affordable anyhow. And this is why the magic has worked, because two forces in play. Okay. Or the thing is more cheaper, and also it costs less to have it.
But it wasn't so easy to get to that point. You're saying it got cheaper, yeah, but when you started, it was startling to me. When you started, first of all, this was a very high goal, a very high hurdle. This was expensive stuff, even by our standards. And so you really mean you said, well, I'm going to bring a very expensive technology to a country and to people who can in essence not afford it.
Right. Well, that's what everybody said, but because I believed in the Moore's law, which not I believed, it's a fact. It's taking place even at the time. It has it has already lived through another 30 years or so. Okay, and now it has lived, let's say, another 30 years. The Moore's law basically says that every 2 years, let's say, roughly speaking, every 2 years, the cost of the processing of the digital technologies becomes half. Okay, so 4 years it becomes 1/4, and so that means 8 years it becomes 1/16. Okay, and but you see, it's multi compounding, and the next 4 years, 12 years, it will become, you'll see, 1/64.
You started at point one. When you started, it was unaffordable. And how did you overcome that? Like, how do you sell some?
Actually, gentlemen, if you don't mind, can I interject just for a second? Because I feel like we're skipping something that our audience members don't understand yet, which is literally what is Grameenphone? What's the concept?
So I'll tell you this point. Well, I eventually, so this was a conceptual idea I had, that it could work, okay, financially speaking, but it was still theory. Somebody has to distribute it, somebody has to create a company, and has to follow up this and actually deliver according to the theory. Okay. But what is most difficult in a, because remember, all these underdeveloped countries have one mega city, and then vast rural areas, very poor infrastructures. It is hard to distribute something. Okay, and it is a vicious cycle, because everything is in one mega city. When somebody is bringing something interesting, they would bring to that big city, and it would just exacerbate that problem. Okay, it's a vicious cycle. So, for example, let's say in Bangladesh, you could go to a computer store and buy computers in that city, not in the other parts of the country. Okay, So my calculation was that if you focus on the Moore's law, just I'm coming back to Rebecca's question, that my calculation was that it could go to anybody, no matter where they are. Okay. So if that is the case, then I wanted to break that vicious cycle and take it everywhere. Okay. Now that distribution had a practical problem of distributing. So I'm saying theoretical issue of prices and does it make you more productive or not? That's the theoretical part. But the practical part, somebody has to go and make these available throughout the country, which is a difficult task. So my solution, I didn't know that it is going to become Grameenphone. Eventually the company name became Grameenphone because Grameen Bank backed it. Now Grameen in Bengali means village, rural. Okay. Grameen Bank backed it. The point is that they have been lending money to quote unquote poor people who could borrow some money as microcredit and get into a business. A typical case was that somebody could borrow $200 and buy a cow, let's say, and that cow would give milk, and the milk could be sold in her neighborhood. Now, this is how the loans were paid back because she could take that money and produce milk, sell in the community, and pay back the loan. So I started telling them that, a phone could be a cow, it could be serving that community. Okay. And that's when they started taking it seriously. And over time, it took a couple of years to convince all the pieces. All pieces means, let's say, there was a Norwegian telephone company I managed to convince, Grameen Bank, which would be utilized for distribution. And then Grameen Bank said, please call it Grameenphone. That is how it became Grameenphone. But the Grameenphone is just a brand name. It actually serves the whole country, but it also serves the rural areas, which was something people did not dare to go.
That's perfect. Let me briefly interject here before we come back to more of our conversation with Iqbal Qadir. But the cool thing is that you took an underdeveloped country and you had this, you made this incredible connection between two periods of let's say lack of connectivity, and you said I can make things better by bringing the cell phone to all over rural Bangladesh. And we're going to double click on that point when we come back. But first, friends, thank you so much for supporting us all the way to season 4. If you are enjoying this episode, please express that by subscribing to the podcast on whatever platform you like. So that you never miss an episode, and also because your likes and your reviews and your sharing and telling people about it really do help the algorithm get this podcast in front of the people who like you who want to hear it and who enjoy it. You can also leave a comment or a question or a suggestion for a future episode on our social media accounts. We love to hear from you, and we are entirely donor funded. So we rely on your support. And as Mother Angelica used to say, we wouldn't mind if you keep us between your power and your electricity bills and your water bills. And with that, let's get back to our conversation.
Yes, welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Iqbal Quadir of MIT and Grameenphone and many other companies. Maybe that's something we can talk about, Iqbal. Some of the lessons you've learned and I think that you taught the world. This is, I feel that I've written about it in my own book, and again, in transparency, we know each other for many years. What I think is so interesting about you is that people talk about the big names like Nortel and Grameen and all of that, but the guy who made it happen is you, and the name, in a sense, overshadows what actually happened. And what actually happened is somebody just as meaning you weren't like this big corporate guy or something. You were literally just a kid who said, look, I'm losing productivity. This product from the developed world needs to go and is actually, as you call, can be the cow, can be a value creator for people in rural or urban areas in emerging markets. Tell me a bit of the resistance you have, because today it's easy to look back and say, well, of course Iqbal did that. This wasn't so easy, was it?
No. But you see, the point is, if you, I really think we need to think, if we want to make quote unquote poor countries not so poor, then we need to think about what resource do they really have. They have human beings. And as long as the human beings use their time, their hands, their brains productively, then the economy is bound to pick up. And that is the best way to pick up. Okay. And frankly, the scale of so-called scale of poverty problem exactly corresponds to the scale of people, to the number of people you have. Okay. If you have a place where there is no people, then there is no poverty. Okay. So what I'm saying is it, it corresponds exactly to that. So as long as you make the people more productive, okay, you address the poverty problem. Okay. So that is why I think, and what I didn't do anything about digital technology, I was just aware of it. So I'll tell you one point. Because Andreas was kind of hinting at that question, but he didn't quite utter it yet, which is when I went to really delve into it. At the time, the phone was about $500, a digital phone, and the GDP of Bangladesh per capita was like $291. Okay. So it's almost twice as much. So it's almost like saying, I wish to sell some car in America to everybody, which will be $100,000 because the GDP per capita here is like $60,000. Okay. So, and that roughly corresponds to that. That's absurd. How will you do that? Okay. And I was basically saying that this $100,000 car will slowly become $5,000. Slowly means through according to the Moore's law. And because it will make me mobile, I'll be able to work more than what I'm doing now. That is the main point. Okay. And the Grameen Bank came into the picture in order to distribute this to the rural areas. Okay. And it took 3 4 years to convince all the parties like Telenor from Norway. Of course, I was rejected by many other telephone companies, and I was also convincing Grameen Bank, a few other parties. Eventually the government has to be convinced. So all of these things took several years to put together, and I was running around and putting that together. Okay. But the bottom line is, the digital technologies, I didn't really do anything. I That was just evolving. My point was, how do I take advantage of that? And so the message also, since you're sitting in Washington, I'm also trying to say, perhaps Silicon Valley has better answer to the poverty, global poverty problem than Washington does. Okay. So maybe this will not fly well in Washington, but that is the point.
In our little corner of Washington, it does. It flies very
Right.
well.
Okay.
But maybe double click on that, Iqbal, because I could be wrong, but I vaguely recollect in your story that part of what you did was go first to the first people you think of when you think about helping the developing world. You went to kind of the aid route, like to I don't know which entities in particular, but
No, no, not quite. I actually went to Grameen Bank because if they were on board, I would have easier time convincing others. Okay. But there is another philosophical reason why I went to them. They were really dealing with the ground reality, not any ivory tower thinking anywhere. Okay. They knew what the women who need to buy a cow, or they knew who could buy goats. So they were really, so their expertise is really what is going on the in the country. Okay. So that is why I tried to convince them, but they didn't, frankly. They did, they were kind of provoked by the idea, but they wanted to see me put everything together. So I still had to find the Norwegian telephone company to my. I started in originally in New York, and New York cell phone companies turned me down. So I moved on. Okay, and so eventually all these pieces came together, and frankly, the it has worked out spectacularly. But I want to make another important point. Um, in some ways, I people think sometimes I get credit for thinking about it for the global use of this phone, even the poorest countries. But there, Bangladesh helped me because Bangladesh had a very low GDP per capita. So it pushed me to the extreme that I might otherwise not think about. You see my point? That had my country not been so extreme case, I may not have solved a quote unquote a global problem. But this is where I think everything can play a role.
But the average, I don't know what you were, 27 or 30-year-old, doesn't sit in his office in New York City pondering productivity and the loss of such when their computer goes out. You have a particular, along with your strain of thinking and using of technology and so on, you have a strain of thinking that is very, I don't want to say, yeah, market friendly, but you have a pedigree of education that gave you a perspective that is
Yeah.
very different than the average person.
Oh, sorry. Rebecca asked me about the that I went to the aid direction. Not quite. I went to the Grameen Bank direction initially from the beginning. Okay, but I sometimes told the story. Let's say in Washington, there the thinking is aid needs to solve these problems. That's why I try to say that does not necessarily help, but it has to be because my background is in Wall Street at the time, so I was thinking commercially. Okay, and when I got more and more time to think about this problem, which I have spent many years to think about it, I am more convinced that that was a very sound idea, but my fundamental background automatically pushed me to that. Okay, because and I've thought about that point that I was just making. The scale of the problem corresponds to the scale of the population. Okay, it's not an independent of that. Okay, so the best use of best way of making progress in a quote unquote poor country is to make use of the people out there.
But this wasn't the first time you thought about these kind of issues. Didn't you already in Bangladesh start to observe things in your house and things of how maybe some of the people that you worked with or worked
Yeah,
for
yeah.
you?
So let me answer another question. That what gave me the confidence in this? Okay, there was a reason I was having confidence, even if it was a device was $500, and the GDP per capita was roughly, um, um, let's say $300. Okay. Still, why did I believe that this will be feasible? Let me make a very practical point. It turns out that 1984 the Apple computer came up with Macintosh computer, uh, and I recruited my younger brother to develop a Macintosh computer, if you recall, had a fundamental font. You could design a font. Before the Macintosh computer, all computer printing was like a typewriter. It would You could not manipulate the font. So when the manipulation of the font became possible, it occurred to me that I could design let's say instead of I could design the first character of the Bengali alphabet. Okay, so I bought a computer, $4,000 at the time. Okay, and I asked my brother to sit down and design all the fonts of and simply make a Bengali computer. Okay, and he actually took a summer off and did that. Okay, and we became This is interesting. The $4,000 computer. There is a reason why I'm bringing this up. And then the we did successfully make a Bengali computer, which could print out a Bengali letter, etc., etc. Okay, because the computer doesn't know it's thinking in Bengali. It is simply printing, which instead of A B we have another two letters. Okay, we took it to the Washington ambassador of Bangladesh, and he was extremely impressed. Okay, this is in 1984. Okay, and but we really were college students, etc. We couldn't quite go and market it. But I realized another important problem, that if I was interested in bringing this technology to Bangladesh. Now, what happened? And this is why this story is interesting in multiple ways. Let me explain that that we could not. I then realized that a $4,000 still a lot of money for a Bangladeshi typical person. Maybe the very elites could buy it. Okay, but to me that was not interesting. Okay, and plus we were students. It was hard to market this, etc. Plus, on top of money and everything, there's also only the very literate who is also have a lot of wealth could buy such a Bengali computer. Okay. So this is why I dropped it. But at that time, a digital device was $4,000. And now in 93, 9 years later, I'm thinking about a digital device that is even expensive one. This was the GSM phone was the high end part of the digital phones. Okay. So then I said, oh, you know what? This Moore's law is playing out right here, because in 9 years it has become, let's say, almost 1/10, 1/8. Okay. So another 10 years it'll become 1/8 of that. That will be $60. Okay. And so it is, so I could see this play out like in front of me. And if you are using a phone where you speak to one another, you don't need the literacy that you needed to use a computer. Okay, so my drive was to go to the very bottom, and that was feasible that way too. Okay, so all these made sense to me. It's just a matter of implementing it, and this is why Grameen Bank played a very important role in taking it to the ground level problem.
Yeah, because they understood the clientele so well and the conditions on the ground.
Yeah, they understood the clientele, and they could give a loan to finance a phone. You see, it all came together.
Didn't you run into a bit of the typical Western attitude of, I think you indicated this even a little bit right at the top of our conversation, that sometimes part of why it took 3 years was not just the problem of who would take the risk of this kind of investment, but also a little bit of the attitude of, gosh, people are so poor. First, they need literacy. First, they need nutrition programs. First, they need, the last thing they need is a cell phone. That'll be last on the list. So, and so you reverse the logic. Like, no, actually, the cell phone is the first thing, and the other things will come.
Yes, because my point is, if people can have an income, they can solve their own problems, and which is actually true. In India, they say people have cell phones, but they don't. They're not. Every family has a toilet. You see, they are smart. They are looking for ways to make their time more valuable. So to me that makes sense. I mean, I'm for all for toilets, but what I'm trying to say is that, is, is that is that I can see the priorities working out perfectly, because everybody has one brain. They can make use of their they can prioritize what is important to them. So if they have the income, they can say, oh, I need to buy vegetables, or I need to buy meat, I need to get a chair, or I need to have a toilet in my house, whatever. So what I'm trying to say, we don't have to decide from above.
Yeah, the biggest mistake we make, and it's not just in that, the biggest mistake we made if we think that people are dumb. that we do this in poverty solutions all the time, where we think we treat the poor like children, like they don't know what's good for them. They are perfectly, they optimize for the market, and they, if you were in their position, you would do exactly the same thing. They're not at a disadvantage of that.
Right. No, no. I think their brains, if anything, are better than ours because they're dealing with the problems themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll tell you a scientific thing I've discovered recently. I mean, not recently. I may have discovered recently, but it's known. Most of 90% of our knowledge is is unconsciously absorbed by us. Okay. So how would anybody pushing paper and writing, reading, how would you know what the problem is? The people who are experiencing it are are actually have a better sense of the problem, who cannot even write it down and send it to you.
So giving them freedom to act
Yeah, yeah, for
is
sure, for
probably the
sure.
best solution
Yeah,
to
yeah,
eradicating or fighting
yeah.
poverty.
So, along those lines, let's prove the point, Iqbal, by telling a little bit about what the fruits were. Once this got going, how this phone in the hands of rural people, how that unleashed a whole set of good of good and fruitful results.
I mean, first of all, they could supply, let's say somebody is growing bananas or chicken or something, they could more efficiently supply them to the urban areas. That's if we are focusing on rural development. But of course, the phones are simply connecting everybody to everybody else. Okay, but including what the areas that were otherwise neglected. That's the part that rural areas were neglected for multiple reasons. Okay, they got better, and they got a better price for their supplies because they could bargain better with the urban shops which would retail them. That's one. But also many people in from Bangladesh actually work even abroad. Bangladesh right now has 10 to 12 million people who work in the Middle East or maybe in Malaysia or Singapore, things like that. And people who, once you have a phone in your village or to your home, eventually the phone business worked for 10 years, 12 years, like that. It became a mobile pay phone, so to speak. And even America now do not have pay phones anymore. But there used to be a time when we had pay phones. Okay, this was basically a mobile pay phone. Okay, but the when once people, so this business, by the way, did not continue forever because it was too successful in everybody getting the phones. When everybody got the phone, then the mobile payphone did not was not necessary anymore, even in the rural areas. Okay, so right now you won't go there and find these things anymore. Okay, it's been almost 30 years, so 15 years or so it worked. Okay, so the bottom line is there are a lot of people who have been encouraged to go abroad and earn money and come back because they could call their mother, their wife, or whatever. And so that was another kind of connectivity. So it's just endless number of things that people are doing. There are people who are working in the urban. Let's say somebody's wife could be an apparel maker in a factory in the urban areas, or the money being transferred from one person to another. So infinite number of transactions taking place. Okay, but people are now embedded in the community they work with. Okay, they're not disconnected physically. Okay, so if somebody's son could be going and working in Saudi Arabia, sending money home. Okay, that process has been further encouraged by the availability of communication.
But it also had another very interesting effect in creating prosperity, and that is when you first dealt with Nortel, they kind of looked at you as, oh, here's this guy from Bangladesh, and this is sort of a developing market kind of charity, thing. Tell me a little bit how Nortel did in the whole
Yeah,
development.
actually, it's Telenor.
Oh, Telenor.
Telenor. Yeah, this is
Yeah,
my favorite part
Telenor.
of the
But
story. So
no, they were very happy. In fact, they came to Bangladesh very skeptical about what is possible here. Okay, here means in Bangladesh. But eventually, they realized it is very lucrative. Actually, it became their best investment, and then they went to many different other Asian countries. Okay, so because they realized the number of people, see, Norway is a country of 5.5 million people. Okay, so there is very big limits on how far they can expand. Okay, whereas Bangladesh has 170 million people. So right now, the Grameenphone has about 50% of the market, but about 85 million subscribers. And then they went to there are many transactions that I don't follow them even. They went to Pakistan, they went to India, they went to Myanmar, Thailand, etc. And I don't know who is doing how, but the Asian market was opened by us.
what I love about that
Well,
is you said, well, I heard you say this once in a talk that what began with this kind of skeptical Western, well, all right, we'll make this investment, but it's kind of charitable.
yeah, yeah,
And it
they
became
had
such a
that.
good investment for them that the people of Bangladesh made more for Norway than Norway made for Bangladesh. And I love that.
That is true.
It's the
That,
great equalizer of
that is true.
markets. This
That
is
is
the great
true.
miracle,
That
right?
is
Like
true.
you unleash the
Yeah,
power of people.
because the dividends going back to Norway, I believe, is far larger.
Yeah. And then you're no longer a client nation. You're
Right,
just a
right.
partner.
Yeah, you remember well. I must have said it one time.
The people who follow this, I mean, Iqbal is an amazingly interesting person, and of course, like people like that are serial entrepreneurs. So you and your brother also, you did follow-ons, right? You're not sitting idle there. Hmm?
Yeah. Well, my brother did it mostly, but I helped him in the beginning. And that company sends money from one phone to another, and that company also has 80 plus million customers right now. And every month, 15 million transactions takes place. No, every day. Every day. Sorry about that. Yeah. So just think about it. Every hour, every waking hour, a million transactions are taking place. So it has made, in my view, the economy far more efficient than otherwise would have been.
I want to see inside the Iqbal Qadir brain and pattern recognition
No,
as what's
there's
happening
nothing.
in the world here. What do you see? I mean, does AI bring these opportunities, or is it the electric cars and batteries, or what? Where do you see the opportunities for the
I
future?
think, listen, if the Moore's law is going to continue to live, anything is possible. We have we have a really supercomputers in our hands. This is a kind of a silent revolution that has taken place without us realizing it. I mean, a lot of people are have the bad habit now to watching many things on YouTube, and that's happening worldwide in rural Bangladesh also. I have met a quote unquote a pretty poor person who said, I bought a smartphone because my daughter is working in as a maid in somebody's house. Now I can talk to her every other day on the phone and visually. I mean through FaceTime or something. So I think the sky is the limit. It's a matter of because what we used to because remember these phones are supercomputers and have infinite number of functions on them,
Mhm.
so anything is feasible, I think.
Yeah, it's the ultimate productivity tool, isn't it?
Yeah, it's ultimate productivity tool for sure. It's like a productivity tool to the power of 4 or 5. Okay.
Iqbal, I could talk with you for hours, which we have in the past, but I think
Thank
we'll
you.
have to close it down here. This is why we've been longing so much to have this conversation with you, and it took a while for us to make the schedules work. But the truth is, Iqbal, you exemplify all the ideas that we're trying to spread about the dignity of work, the value of the human person, how to think about poverty. I also want to thank you for teaching me a lot of this. I remember we worked closely together just before you went with Legatum. That was
Mhm.
early 2000s, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Remember we drove
Yeah,
around
yeah,
Boston
yeah. I still remember that.
and
We were
and
sitting in the Kennedy School cafeteria one time. I still
exactly,
remember that you were
yeah.
having
And I
coffee.
learned a lot
Yeah.
from you, and I just want to thank you and also acknowledge
Thank
that a
you.
lot of these ideas come from you. I teach them
No, no,
now,
no. Thank you. Thank you.
but I want to acknowledge that.
I mean,
Thank you
all
so much
brains are
for.
working. Don't I was saying.
Well, we're spreading. We're just like with cell phones. We're going from one point to the other
Right,
and spread the
right,
news like that.
right.
But thank you. Thanks so much for being
Thank you
with us
very much. Thank
today.
you.
Before we go, Iqbal, how can people get in contact with you if they want to know more about your story or just want to reach out?
My MIT email address works.
Wonderful. We'll put that in the show notes as always.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I love the book called "Can You Hear Me Now," uh, which is the biography that somebody wrote about you.
And thank you for including me in your book too.
Yeah, we'll put all that in the show notes, and so that you all can follow up with what Iqbal is doing now and in the future. But that's all we have time for today, my friends. And thank you, as always, for joining us. We're grateful for your support. And until next time, we hope you prosper.